He constructs an entire mythology around her gestures, her silence, her posture, the way she bites her nails. These details become symbols, not of who she is, but of who he hopes she is. He imagines she must share his melancholy, his wounds, his inner struggles. He imagines that she is the missing half of his heart. Every detail of her becomes evidence, not of her identity, but of destiny. In truth, he does not know her at all, but he feels that he does, and that feeling becomes the foundation for a lifelong romantic worldview. Here, Alain de Botton forces us to look at something uncomfortable. The most intense romantic feelings often occur in the absence of real knowledge. We call it love. Philosophy calls it projection. He doesn't mock this impulse, he explains it. We long to be understood, we long to be seen, and when we encounter someone who triggers that longing, we mistake the longing for recognition. We believe we have found someone who sees us, but in truth, we are the ones doing the seeing. They are simply present. In Stoic philosophy, this would be described as a form of mental illusion, a projection of desire onto external circumstance. The Stoics warn us repeatedly that intense emotions are not reliable guides to truth. They are signals of internal imbalance. To be carried away by longing is not evidence of love, but evidence of need. We think we are moving toward intimacy, but we are actually moving toward dependency. And dependency, when unexamined, becomes suffering. The tragedy is not that Rabbi falls in love. It's that he believes this love is destiny rather than imagination. Alain de Botton teaches that most heartbreak begins not when relationships fail, but when fantasies collapse. We are not grieving the loss of another human being. We are grieving the loss of the narrative we built around them. We mourn the imagined future more than the actual present. The pain is real, even if the fantasy was illusion. But illusion is often all we have. Romanticism, de Botton argues, is a philosophical inheritance, a belief system with roots in literature, art, and cultural storytelling. It has taught us that love should be intuitive, effortless, transcendent, and unconditional. That our soulmate is out there, that love should be magical, that love should overcome every obstacle. We rarely examine how destructive this ideology is. We simply absorb it, we assume it, we trust it. And so, like Rabbi, we wander through life searching for a missing piece, a person who will complete us. We call this desire romantic. De Botton calls it dangerous. It is here that philosophy becomes more than theory, it becomes medicine. Because philosophy teaches us that the quest for completion is the origin of suffering. Stoicism would say, no human being can complete another. Peace is internal, or it is nothing. Nietzsche would add, humans suffer by clinging to illusions about themselves. Plato would say, desire is a mirror of absence. Alain de Botton synthesizes all of this into a simple, devastating truth. Love does not free us from loneliness. It merely invites us to understand it. Rabbi believes he has found someone who will end his inner ache. But the ache is not rooted in her. It is rooted in life, in loss, in childhood, in grief, in the fundamental human condition. We do not fall in love to know another. We fall in love to escape ourselves. And so love begins with a beautiful mistake. We believe another person can fix what only self-awareness can heal. Rabbi believes Alice represents something transcendent, not because she possesses an extraordinary nature, but because she appears at a moment when he desperately needs meaning. Romanticism teaches him that lightning strikes of feeling are spiritual revelations, but Alain de Botton suggests a harsher interpretation. Most romantic certainty is simply emotional projection. We are not struck by destiny, we are struck by vulnerability. What feels divine is often psychological ache wearing a beautiful mask. This is a theme that runs through all of de Botton's philosophy explained. Love appears transcendent precisely because we want transcendence. Love feels like salvation because we are trying to be saved. The romantic worldview, influenced by novels, films, and cultural myth, conditions us to expect that another human being will rescue us from ourselves. We call this love, but a philosopher might call it metaphysical misplacement, confusing human affection with existential cure. Romanticism whispers that love completes us. Stoicism counters with a quieter voice. You were never incomplete to begin with. The idea that someone else is your missing half creates a relationship structure built on dependency, not freedom. And dependency, however flattering in the beginning, inevitably turns into resentment. The very thing we believe will liberate us becomes the thing that imprisons us. In love, we ask another person to provide what even philosophy struggles to offer: lasting peace. De Botton argues that our romantic fantasies are not evidence of maturity, but evidence that we have not yet confronted ourselves. We long for someone to carry us through life because we have not yet learned how to walk through it alone. And so rather than seeking partnership based on knowledge, we seek emotional anesthesia based on fantasy. We chase intensity instead of understanding, chemistry instead of compatibility, and longing instead of wisdom. This, he says, is why early love feels divine. The less we know, the more extraordinary they appear. Alice's presence gives Rabbi the illusion that life finally makes sense, but what actually makes sense is the human longing for connection after loss. His mother is gone, his heart is wounded, his inner world aches, and Alice appears like a symbolic answer to grief itself. Philosophy lecture or not, his psychology makes her sacred. She is not a person, she is a narrative, a remedy, a story that promises to explain his suffering. When she leaves, the tragedy is not her absence, it is the collapse of meaning. The fantasy dissolves, the ache remains. Here lies the painful irony. Most of what we believe to be love is not about the other person at all. It is about our hunger for rescue. This is where Stoicism provides a counter-teaching. The Stoic approach insists that emotional peace must be cultivated internally, not externally. It warns that human desire, especially romantic desire, is unstable. Its intensity is not proof of truth, but proof of need. The Stoic would say, if another person becomes the centre of your emotional universe, you have already surrendered your freedom. You have already given them power over your inner life. You have already become vulnerable to devastation. And yet the modern world celebrates this surrender as romance. We call it devotion. Alain de Botton calls it a philosophical mistake. He writes subtly but relentlessly that love demands maturity, not intensity. It demands knowledge, not intuition. It demands patience, not destiny. Love is not the discovery of perfection. It is the attempt to understand imperfection. And most importantly, love is not the end of loneliness. It is the ability to face loneliness together. De Botton sees love not as salvation, but as education. Not as magic, but as skill. Not as destiny, but as discipline. We fall in love easily because we confuse emotional intoxication with knowledge. But true love, he insists, begins only after the fantasy dies. Rabbi will learn painfully that the feeling of having found a soulmate is simply the beginning of the work, not the end of searching. The real work of love is not falling in, it is learning how to remain. And remaining requires a skill that romantic culture never teaches: forgiveness, endurance, communication, and humility. Love, de Botton argues, is less a fairy tale and more a philosophical practice. A practice of understanding the other as a complex human being rather than a flawless answer to our wounds. This is why so many relationships fail. Not because love disappears, but because the fantasy collapses faster than wisdom grows. As Rabbi grows up, he will encounter the same romantic pattern again and again, brief encounters that feel eternal, strangers who feel familiar, passing faces that awaken ancient longing. Not because they are soulmates, but because loneliness seeks symbols. Our emotional history is constantly searching for relief. Anyone can become the vessel. Our hearts are too eager to believe. And this brings us to perhaps the most important insight of episode 7. Romantic longing is not evidence of a perfect match. It is evidence of an unresolved self. De Botton does not say this with cruelty. He says it with compassion. He understands that humans ache, that longing is part of being alive, that the desire for union is ancient and powerful. But he also insists that real love begins only after the initial intoxication fades. That beginning may even feel like loss, like disappointment, like disillusionment. But that disillusionment is necessary, because without it, we never encounter the other person at all. Love begins, he says, where fantasy ends. And perhaps maturity begins where love becomes a philosophical practice rather than an emotional escape. Rabi's early encounters teach him something without ever saying it out loud. That romance is supposed to feel like revelation. He believes that love should happen to him, like a cosmic force rather than be something he participates in consciously. It's a deeply modern idea, one that Alain de Botton dissects with surgical calm. Romanticism promises that strong feelings equal deep truth. If we feel certainty, it must be real. If our heart races, destiny must be speaking. We rarely consider that intensity may simply reflect psychological hunger rather than cosmic alignment. But the romantic worldview persuades us that longing is proof, and the more wounded we are, the more convincing longing feels. Here's the tragedy. We build our identity on these feelings. We build our meaning on them. We allow fleeting emotional storms to define who we are. Rabi doesn't merely feel attraction, he becomes someone who belongs to that attraction. The feeling becomes not just an experience, but an identity. And when she leaves, his identity collapses with her. The philosopher would say, this is not love, it is projection. The Stoic would add, this is slavery to emotion. Stoicism warns us that attachment built on fantasy collapses into suffering, because it gives the external world power over our inner life. The romantic heart resists this teaching. The romantic heart clings to feeling as if it were truth. Alain de Botton argues that the most dangerous aspect of modern love is not disappointment, but expectation. We expect another human being to heal what life has broken, to validate what childhood left unsatisfied, to fill the void where our insecurities live. We confuse affection for acceptance, attention for knowledge, and chemistry for compatibility. Most devastating of all, we mistake emotional intensity for love itself. The longing Rabi feels is real, but the meaning he assigns to it is imagined. An imagination, for better or worse, is the architect of romantic illusion. This is why love stories in culture always end at the beginning. The movie ends on the first kiss. The novel ends with the passionate union. The story stops at the moment desire is satisfied. But de Botton insists that true love begins precisely where movies end. Happily Ever After is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of work. And that work is philosophical. That work is daily. That work requires skills we rarely learn until after love has already wounded us. We grow up thinking love is something that happens to us. We do not yet understand that love is something we must learn to do. Romantic culture teaches us a single, dangerous premise, that there is one person, somewhere, designed specifically for us. We rarely examine this idea because everything in our storytelling world reinforces it. Films, novels, pop music, they all whisper the same creed. Someone out there is waiting, tailored exactly for the architecture of your soul. But what if that belief is the very structure of our suffering? Alain de Botton argues that the idea of soulmates originated not from wisdom but from longing, especially the longing created by emotional loneliness. It is a beautiful idea born from an unbearable truth, that most of us feel misunderstood, and so we imagine a person who will perfectly understand. We invent a person before we ever meet one. Rabi doesn't love Alice on the pool chair. He loves the imagined cure to his own emptiness. The fantasy isn't about her, it is about him. And this is where romanticism becomes quietly cruel. It tells us that someone else will finally make life meaningful. It teaches us to outsource happiness. It convinces us that peace is not a discipline. but discovery. It is a gentle tragedy. We fall in love not with people, but with our own missing pieces. The Stoics would say this bluntly: you suffer because you demand from others what only self-discipline can build. Romanticism teaches dependence. Philosophy teaches mastery. But modern culture celebrates romantic dependency as emotional depth and mocks emotional discipline as coldness. So we cling harder. We dream more aggressively. We worship longing. We call it destiny. We think love begins with lightning, but perhaps love begins with knowledge. Knowledge of oneself. Knowledge of what we seek. Knowledge of what we are capable of giving, rather than what we are starving to receive. True love begins not when we meet another person, but when we finally meet ourselves. And that perhaps is the most uncomfortable truth of all. Love as a skill, not a miracle. We are raised to believe that great love simply happens, like weather rolling in or fate intervening. But Alain de Botton insists on something deeply unromantic, and therefore profoundly true. Love is a skill, not a miracle. Passion does not prepare us for commitment. Desire does not educate us in patience. Infatuation does not train us to understand another person's fears, wounds, childhood scars, or anxieties. Romanticism secretly teaches entitlement. We feel deserving of someone who understands us instantly, without us ever having to articulate ourselves. We demand intuitive empathy. We want to be known without revealing anything. And so the moment misunderstanding appears, we say the relationship is wrong, or the partner is wrong, or the universe has betrayed us by sending the wrong soul to the wrong body. But the Stoics warned us centuries ago. We suffer not from events, but from the stories we attach to them. In love, the dangerous story is that someone should always just get us. We have been trained by movies, novels, and social mythology to value the beginning rather than the effort. We worship the spark rather than the construction. We want emotional luxury without emotional labour. De Botton argues that true love begins exactly where romantic love collapses. At the moment we discover difficulty, complexity, inconsistency, insecurity, jealousy, boredom, irritation, disappointment. Romanticism says these are signs of failure. Philosophy says these are the classroom. Love is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to navigate conflict without destroying one another. It is learning how someone became who they are. It is studying the fears that built their defences, the childhoods that shaped their emotional language, the disappointments that shaped their expectations. The point is painfully simple. You cannot love someone without learning their internal architecture. And that requires more than passion. It requires patience, curiosity, and humility. Romanticism promises emotional completion. Philosophy teaches emotional competence. One is seductive, the other is difficult, uncomfortable, and astonishingly rare. De Botton wants us to grow up emotionally, not by abandoning love, but by abandoning fantasies about love. Love becomes possible only when we stop worshipping instinct and begin practicing understanding. When we stop expecting perfection and start learning how to love imperfection. And perhaps the most subversive idea of all is this: love is not something we find, love is something we build. The violence of projection. Most relationships don't collapse because people are bad partners. They collapse because we fall in love with someone who never actually existed. Alain de Botton calls this the violence of projection, the brutal power of imagination over reality. Romantic love is rarely love at all. It is projection, a film we place over a stranger until the real person threatens to appear. We do not see a human being. We see an answer, a rescuer, a cure, a soulmate designed for the secret wounds we've never healed. And this projection is not gentle, it is forceful. We demand that reality conform to fantasy. When it doesn't, we feel betrayed. And yet the Stoics would say, the betrayal is our own, because nothing in nature has promised that another human being will complete the unfinished work inside us. Love does not heal childhood loneliness. It does not erase insecurity. It does not eliminate fear. A partner is not therapy, nor a god, nor a mirror designed to reflect only our best image. But projection turns ordinary humans into screens for our internal movies. We fall in love with symbols rather than individuals. The way someone laughs, the way they look at the sea, the books they read, the clothes they wear. We convert all of this into a myth about who they must be, and so the person becomes a fantasy until that fantasy collapses. The moment they disappoint us, misunderstand us, or reveal imperfection, we feel deceived. But they have not deceived us, we deceived ourselves. Projection is not romantic, it is narcissistic. It turns love into possession. It transforms intimacy into expectation. The other person is imprisoned inside a narrative we wrote long before we ever met them. Love becomes heartbreaking not because it fails, but because we expected it to succeed without effort, without education, without philosophical training. Romantic culture praises instinct, but instinct is just the ghost of old wounds. Philosophy teaches us to examine those wounds instead of demanding others heal them. And perhaps the most painful realization is this: we don't fall in love with people, we fall in love with the story they allow us to tell about ourselves. The disappointment we never learned to expect. When projection fades, and it always does, we confront something our culture has never properly prepared us for: the ordinariness of real people. Suddenly, the miraculous soulmate becomes another flawed human with confusing emotions, contradictory behaviours, and unromantic needs. They get tired, they get irritated, they misunderstand us, they withdraw, they resist, they forget our birthday, or fail to notice our pain. And in these moments, we don't merely feel annoyed, we feel wounded, as though we had been promised a different reality and cruelly denied it. Romantic culture taught us that love is clarity, ease, alignment, perfect emotional synchronization. So when difficulty appears, we interpret it not as part of love, but as evidence of the wrong love. The Stoics warned us that the world will rarely behave according to our expectations. Our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our beliefs about how those events should unfold. Apply this to love, and the lesson becomes devastating. Most heartbreak doesn't come from the person. It comes from the fantasy we constructed about love. Alain de Botton says something quietly radical. The moment love becomes difficult is the moment love actually begins. Not because struggle is romantic, but because understanding another person requires work. Patient, unglamorous, philosophical work. Listening without defending, speaking without attacking, asking instead of assuming. These are not skills we inherit from passion. They are skills we must learn, slowly, clumsily, imperfectly. Love is not intuitive instinct. Love is emotional training. We aren't born knowing how to love. We are born knowing how to desire. Desire comes naturally. Understanding must be built. Passion arrives like lightning. Love arrives like architecture. Brick by brick, moment by moment, failure by failure. And perhaps this is why so many relationships collapse before they ever become relationships. We abandon them at the precise moment they ask us to grow. We mistake emotional discomfort for incompatibility. We confuse emotional difficulty with the wrong partner. But philosophy tells us something revolutionary. Love is not the absence of struggle. Love is the willingness to learn how to struggle together. We must forgive our fantasies. If love is a skill, then the first and most necessary skill is forgiveness, but not forgiveness in the Hollywood sense, not grand gestures, not dramatic reconciliations, but something quieter, stranger, and far more philosophical. Learning to forgive the fact that the other person is human. Alain de Botton suggests we forgive not because the partner deserves it, but because punishment accomplishes nothing. Most of the things we resent in others were not invented to hurt us. They are simply the byproducts of their history, their childhoods, their fears, their insecurities, their emotional language. learned long before we arrived. We imagine that love means being perfectly understood, perfectly considered, always seen. But that expectation is a cruelty disguised as romance. We cannot ask someone to know wounds we never revealed, to soothe pain we never explained, to heal damage we never acknowledged. The Stoics would say it plainly. Anger is evidence of an unexamined expectation. We think the partner should instinctively know us. We think the right person wouldn't hurt us. We think love should flow without explanation. But that is not love. That is fantasy. True love does not emerge from being known instantly, but from being willing to explain ourselves patiently. Forgiving someone means accepting that they too are carrying invisible history. They too are fighting private storms. They too are learning how to be human in real time. And here is the quiet truth. Romantic culture refuses to teach. The partner isn't being difficult, they are being human, and so are we. Forgiveness is not permission for harm, it is permission for imperfection. It is surrendering the fantasy of the supernatural soulmate and accepting the complexity of real intimacy. Because love isn't about finding perfection. It is about learning how to live with imperfection without turning away. The addiction to beginnings. We are addicted to beginnings because beginnings ask nothing of us. They require no skills, no patience, no emotional discipline. They are filled with admiration rather than negotiation. The early stages of desire make us feel competent, secure, and lovable without us having to demonstrate maturity. We are praised simply for existing. Alain de Botton points out that we are drawn to the intoxicating energy of newness because it frees us from the responsibility of actually being known. New people don't yet see our flaws. They don't yet witness our anxiety, our insecurity, our impatience, our stubbornness. A new partner hasn't yet discovered the shadows we try to conceal. And so beginnings become emotional heroin, a perfect high without consequence, until reality inevitably arrives. Then we mourn the loss of the beginning, as though love itself has died. But what we are mourning isn't love, it's fantasy. We aren't grieving the partner, we are grieving the collapse of our idealized self-image, reflected through their initial admiration. The Stoics warned us about this psychological trap. They taught that no human experience is sustainable when built on pleasure alone. Pleasure fades, novelty dissolves, and when it dissolves, we are forced to examine something far more uncomfortable than the partner. We must examine ourselves. De Botton insists that long-term relationships require a radically different mindset. Early romance asks, "How do I feel when I'm with you?" Mature love asks, "How do we build a world together?" The shift is terrifying because it forces us to accept responsibility for our own emotional lives. Beginnings comfort us with the illusion that love is effortless. Relationships reveal that love is work. Romanticism promises ease. Philosophy teaches endurance. The work of love is not glamorous, and therefore most people never truly begin loving at all. They simply chase the next beginning. Love does not die when passion fades. Love begins when passion fades. The fear of boredom. One of the most quietly destructive illusions of romantic culture is the belief that love should always feel exciting. We think thrill is proof of compatibility, and boredom is evidence that something is wrong. But Alain de Botton argues that boredom is not the opposite of love. It is the opposite of novelty, and novelty is not the same as intimacy. The early stages of love are thrilling precisely because everything is unknown. The simple act of discovering someone's favourite food or childhood memory feels meaningful, but discovery inevitably becomes familiarity, and familiarity inevitably becomes routine. The real question is not whether we become bored, but what we do with boredom once it arrives. Romantic culture teaches us to interpret boredom as emotional failure. The Stoics would say boredom is merely an unexamined expectation clashing with reality. When the electricity fades, most people conclude the relationship has reached its end. They assume they have chosen incorrectly. But boredom is not a verdict, It is an invitation. It invites us to investigate, to deepen, to learn, to build. Boredom isn't a sign that love is over. It's a sign that love is ready to evolve. Passion is the spark, but maturity is the structure that sustains a fire. The tragedy is that most relationships never reach maturity because we never learned how to transition from romance to partnership, from instinct to skill, from pleasure to patience. De Botton suggests that true love requires tolerating periods that feel ordinary, repetitive, and uneventful. In fact, this is the moment when love becomes truly philosophical. When we stop relying on emotion and start practicing intention. Love grows not by pursuing constant stimulation, but by embracing the sacredness of the ordinary. Small routines, familiar gestures, quiet companionship, shared habits. Love is not always exciting, but it can be astonishingly meaningful, because true connection is not built on endless novelty, but on enduring presence. Conflict has a childhood. Conflict feels catastrophic because romantic culture insists that the right person shouldn't hurt us. But Alain de Botton and centuries of philosophy suggest something darker and more realistic. Conflict is inevitable precisely because love surfaces the parts of ourselves we have not healed. Arguments are not about dishes, tone, lateness, or small acts of disrespect. They are about childhood, insecurity, wounds, abandonment, and fear. The Stoics teach that our reactions are shaped not by events, but by interpretations formed long before the present moment. When a partner withdraws, we may feel abandoned, not because they are abandoning us, but because we were once abandoned by someone before them. When they criticize us, we may feel attacked, not because their words are violent, but because they remind us of voices that once belittled us. We enter relationships believing we are adults, but emotionally, we are still children carrying childhood pain into adult intimacy. We don't just choose partners, we choose patterns. We recreate the emotional landscapes we grew up in. We repeat what we know. We unconsciously seek familiar pain because familiar pain feels like home. This is why relationships feel so dangerous. They expose our emotional history. They require us to confront wounds we would rather ignore. Love makes us vulnerable, not because someone might leave us, but because someone might see us. Philosophy explained in simple terms, love forces us to become students of our own psychological past. De Botton insists that most conflict is miscommunication between two different emotional languages, formed in two different childhoods. When we argue, we aren't fighting each other. We are fighting ghosts. The partner is merely the canvas onto which our fears are projected. This is why patience is not a romantic virtue. It is a survival skill. We must learn to ask the question Romanticism never taught us. What pain are you speaking from right now? Only then can conflict become a door rather than a wall. The terror of vulnerability. We say we want intimacy, but intimacy terrifies us because intimacy requires visibility. And visibility requires vulnerability. To love someone is to allow them to see our fears, our insecurities, our doubts, our emotional scars, our inner contradictions. Romantic culture tells us this should be effortless, but Alain de Botton argues that vulnerability is the most difficult emotional task the human being can attempt. We are taught that love means being accepted, yet we fear revealing the parts of ourselves that might be rejected. This creates a painful paradox. We desire closeness, while protecting ourselves from the very exposure that closeness demands. The Stoics would call this a conflict between desire and fear, wanting something intensely while defending ourselves against the risk it requires. So instead of revealing ourselves, we hide. We avoid difficult conversations, repress complaints, disguise needs, pretend we are fine. We use silence to avoid conflict, anger to avoid fear, withdrawal to avoid disappointment. And slowly we become strangers inside a relationship built on emotional absence. The tragedy is that silence feels safer than truth, until silence becomes suffocating. Vulnerability is frightening because it requires trusting that someone will not use our weaknesses to harm us. But how could they prove that without us first revealing those weaknesses? Emotional exposure always precedes emotional safety. This is the cruel architecture of intimacy. Someone must go first. Someone must be vulnerable before vulnerability feels safe. De Botton suggests that the real danger isn't vulnerability, it's avoiding vulnerability. Because avoidance builds resentment, loneliness, and distance. Relationships don't die from conflict. They die from silence. Not from what is said, but from what remains unsaid. Philosophy Lecture Simplified: love requires risking who we are in order to become who we could be with another person. And the deepest truth is intimacy is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Love as a skill. We imagine love is something we feel. Alain de Botton insists love is something we must learn. Romantic culture celebrates emotion, intensity, passion, chemistry, yet neglects the work required to sustain love once the feelings settle. We know how to desire another person, but do we know how to handle disappointment, jealousy, boredom, conflict? The answer for most of us is painfully obvious. We assume that because love signals compatibility, conflict must signal incompatibility. But the truth is almost the opposite. Conflict is not a failure of love. It is proof that love has begun. Conflict appears when reality replaces fantasy. When two human beings collide not as idealized projections, but as flawed, emotional, wounded creatures. Romantic love ends where real love begins. We enter relationships expecting understanding instead of learning how to understand. We expect someone to read our needs instead of learning how to express them. We expect harmony instead of practicing communication. We want empathy, but we rarely ask ourselves whether we are empathetic partners. De Botton argues that relationships require what schools never taught us: emotional intelligence, a skill set rooted in patience, curiosity, and humility. The courage to say, "This hurt me." The grace to ask, "Did I misunderstand?" The maturity to realise that someone's bad mood might not be about us at all. In truth, most relationship failures are not failures of love. They're failures of untrained emotions. Philosophy Lecture Simplified. Love isn't a gift we receive, it's a discipline we practice. The collapse of happily ever after. We are raised on a dangerous myth. The cinematic fairy tale that teaches us relationships culminate at the moment of union. From childhood, every story ends precisely when real love would actually begin. The wedding kiss, the reconciliation scene, the emotional climax fade to black. But life doesn't fade to black. Life continues, and so do we. Sometimes with nothing but fantasy-based expectations and no education about the mundane, relentless work of loving another human soul. Alain de Botton points out something startling. Romantic narratives stop at the moment commitment begins, because commitment is too ordinary, too repetitive, too psychologically demanding to depict. The real story, the hard story, the daily story, the part where two individuals must negotiate mood swings, finances, exhaustion, chores, resentment, insecurities, desires, never gets told. Reality arrives quietly. Not as betrayal or tragedy, but as routine. Love becomes less about intensity and more about kindness. Less about excitement and more about patience. Less about dramatic passion and more about staying when passion is absent. The collapse many couples feel is not a collapse of love. It's the collapse of a naive storyline that could never carry the weight of real intimacy. De Botton warns us that the fairy tale has a hidden cruelty. It convinces us that the ordinary texture of a relationship, its frustrations, its repetitions, its imperfections, means something is wrong. When in reality, the ordinary is exactly what love must learn to survive. Philosophy Lecture Simplified. Love doesn't end after the beginning. It begins after the beginning. Jealousy, the fear we call love. Jealousy is one of the most misunderstood emotions in all of love. Most of us mistake it for loyalty, passion, or proof of deep emotional attachment. But Alain de Botton, and philosophy in general, suggests something far darker and far more human. Jealousy is rarely about the other person at all. It is about the self we fear we are not. When we feel jealous, we imagine someone else replacing us, not just romantically, but existentially. Someone more interesting, more attractive, more impressive. Someone who threatens the identity we believed love had granted us. Jealousy appears to be about ownership, but beneath that is a fear of disposability. Plato understood this centuries ago when he distinguished between desire that comes from insecurity and love that seeks the good of the other. Modern romantic culture has reversed these priorities. We see obsessive attachment, suspicion, possessiveness, even surveillance as passionate love. We call control devotion. We call anxiety commitment. But jealousy is rarely anything more than a panic that our worth is conditional. And here lies de Botton's most painful insight. Jealousy imagines we are vulnerable because we depend on another person to prove we matter. True love, he argues, doesn't remove jealousy, it exposes it. It drags our insecurities into daylight and forces us to confront what we believe about ourselves. And this is where philosophy becomes more than theory. It becomes a form of self-examination. Stoicism reminds us that we suffer not from what happens, but from the stories we attach to what happens. Jealousy is one of those stories, a fear narrative disguised as romantic intensity. Why we choose people who hurt us. One of the most haunting ideas emerging from Alain de Botton's philosophy of love, echoing Freud, echoing Plato, echoing millennia of human confusion, is that our romantic instincts are not guided by what will make us happy. They are guided by what feels familiar. And familiarity isn't always kind, it often hurts. We don't fall in love with what nurtures us. We fall in love with what we recognise. De Botton explains that love is a reenactment. We are drawn to the emotional patterns we first learned in childhood. Affection mixed with withdrawal. Kindness pierced by criticism. The unpredictable rhythm of approval and disappointment. Because somewhere in our emotional memory, love was never simple, never generous, never without tension. So when we meet someone calm, steady, caring and emotionally available, we strangely feel nothing. Something inside us quietly insists, this doesn't feel like love. Because what feels like love is actually what feels like home, even if home was full of uncertainty. And here is the painful philosophical truth. We choose what we're used to surviving, not what will help us heal. We confuse intensity with intimacy. We mistake anxiety for passion. We believe love should unsettle us because safety feels suspicious. Plato warned us about this thousands of years ago. Love can either elevate the soul toward virtue or trap it inside old wounds. We walk into relationships expecting rescue, but instead we walk into reenactments of unfinished emotional battles. The modern romantic myth says love heals us. Philosophy says love reveals us. When lovers become enemies, the war we call marriage. It is one of the most uncomfortable truths in de Botton's philosophy of relationships. The person we love most is often the one we end up fighting with most bitterly. Not because they are our enemy, but because they unknowingly carry the power to expose every insecurity we've spent a lifetime trying to hide. A stranger can insult us and we shrug, but a partner, one sigh, one cold tone, one quiet withdrawal, and suddenly we feel as though our entire worth is being questioned. Because romantic closeness collapses the distance between who we are and how we are seen. Our partner's disappointment feels like a verdict on our existence. Philosophy describes this as a collapse of boundaries. Plato believed that love dissolves the illusion that we are separate selves. Two souls become interconnected, and so every emotional tremor in one is felt painfully in the other. What looks like rage is often vulnerability wearing armour. De Botton insists that most romantic conflict is not actually about the issue at hand. It is about fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of irrelevance. Lovers become enemies because they become mirrors, reflecting the parts of ourselves we do not wish to face. Marriage is not war because two people dislike each other. It is war because two people are terrified of losing what they finally found. So arguments escalate, not because we hate our partner, but because losing them feels like losing identity itself. And here is the Stoic twist. The person we are fighting is usually not our partner. It is the wounded part of ourselves speaking through them. The soulmate myth, loving a stranger we invented, the most poetic and most destructive idea modern love carries is that somewhere out there exists a person meant for us, a soulmate whose arrival will finally end loneliness, confusion, and emotional hunger. De Botton calls this one of the great romantic illusions, the belief that love is recognition rather than construction. We imagine that when we meet the right person, we will simply know. This belief comes not from reason, but from a kind of emotional mysticism, a romantic instinct Plato wrote about when describing eros as a recollection of something divine. The idea that we recognize someone the moment we meet them is intoxicating because it seems like destiny. But in reality, what we recognize is rarely the person. It is our own longing mirrored back at us. Nobody shows us their full truth at the beginning. In fact, at the beginning, both people are largely engaged in a performance. Polished, edited, hopeful versions of themselves. We're not choosing a human being. We're choosing a fantasy, a projected ideal, a story written inside our own mind. De Botton points out that the person we choose is never actually the one we think we're choosing, because the real work of love begins only after the story collapses. Once the mask falls away, once our fantasies encounter human imperfection, once we see the other as flawed, frightened, complicated, it is then, not at the beginning, that love becomes real. Plato would call this the movement from appearance to essence, from eros to philosophy. We begin in illusion, but are invited into truth, if we're courageous enough to stay. And here's the quiet irony. The person we truly love emerges only after the idealized version dies. Love is a skill we were never taught. One of Alain de Botton's most confronting claims is that love is not a feeling. It is a skill. Skills require education, repetition, error, patience, practice, and correction. Yet in the most important domain of our lives, relationships, most of us were never educated at all. No one teaches us how to handle disappointment gently. No one teaches us how to remain kind during fear. No one teaches us how to argue without humiliation. We learn mathematics, geography, and sentence structure, but not how to communicate desire, negotiate insecurity, or apologize without defensiveness. Instead, we are guided by instinct, impulse, and romantic mythology. We believe we should just know how to love, as if love is automatic and effortless. But de Botton argues that love actually begins where instinct ends, because instinct leads us mostly toward anxiety, possession, jealousy, and emotional panic. Plato would nod knowingly here. He believed love begins as a wild impulse, but must evolve toward understanding. The Greeks understood that raw desire isn't noble. It is unformed energy. It must be shaped by reason, discipline, and philosophical reflection. Stoic philosophy agrees we must study ourselves, question our reactions, and learn emotional mastery. The Stoic lover doesn't just feel, they examine their feelings, challenge them, and choose wiser responses. So what makes love last? Not passion, not chemistry, not fate, but education, emotional literacy, maturity earned through repeated misunderstanding. We learn love by failing at it. We become good lovers only after discovering how many ways we can hurt each other and choosing differently. Why desire eventually turns into disappointment. Desire begins as imagination. We don't fall in love with a real person. We fall in love with the promise of what we believe they are. In the opening phases, our partner functions more like a symbol than a human being. a symbol of rescue, of meaning, of tenderness, of possibility. We project onto them everything we have been seeking internally: security, validation, admiration, purpose. But over time, reality arrives. The symbolic figure fades, and a human takes its place. Someone tired, imperfect, occasionally selfish, defensive, insecure, or emotionally limited. The disappointment feels like betrayal, but it is actually disillusionment, the falling away of illusion. De Botton suggests this moment is not the end of love, but the beginning of it. We must move from infatuation to understanding, from fantasy to empathy. The disappointment we feel isn't proof that we chose the wrong person. It's proof that our expectations were unrealistically high. Plato anticipated this collapse. He believed we love not because we understand the other person, but because we are striving towards something transcendent. When that transcendence fails to materialize, we blame the other person, even though the disappointment belongs to the ideal, not the individual. The Stoics warn us expectations without examination are a guarantee of suffering. We desire what we imagine, then we resent reality for being real. Modern love teaches us to chase intensity. Philosophy teaches us to cultivate patience. The trauma we bring into love without knowing it.
If there is a hidden gravitational force inside love, de Botton argues, it is emotional history. We don't enter relationships as blank pages. We enter carrying every wound, fear, abandonment, and unmet need we've ever endured. But rather than consciously examine these histories, we reenact them. Not deliberately, instinctively.
A partner raises their voice, and somewhere in our subconscious, an old memory wakes up. They go quiet during an argument, and suddenly we're 6 years old again, begging for attention from someone emotionally unavailable. They forget to text back, and our nervous system interprets it not as a delay, but as rejection. This is why seemingly small issues explode. We aren't reacting to the moment, we're reacting to our past bursting into the present. What feels irrational is simply a younger self trying to defend itself. Plato would say that love makes the unconscious visible. What was silent becomes spoken. What was buried becomes exposed. Love forces us to confront ourselves, because intimacy means we cannot hide from the parts of us that bleed. Stoicism warns that unexamined emotions enslave us. Until we face our internal injuries, we will keep punishing partners for the crimes of people who are no longer in our lives. This is why some relationships feel heavier than they should, because two adults are unconsciously carrying the emotional ghosts of childhood. Healing begins not when we avoid conflict, but when we recognize its origin. Love becomes philosophy when we stop asking, "What's wrong with you?" and begin asking, "What happened to both of us?" And so here we are, my friend, at the quiet edge of another night, somewhere between the ache of desire and the exhaustion of being misunderstood. If Alain de Botton teaches us anything, it's that love is rarely the fairy tale we dream of, and yet somehow it remains the most urgent thing we pursue. Maybe tonight, as you lie there, you're thinking about someone who once felt like your answer, someone who arrived like destiny and disappeared like a lesson. Or maybe you're beside someone right now, feeling that uncomfortable truth that love reveals more about you than it ever hides. We imagine love will complete us, but perhaps its real purpose is far stranger. It completes the questions we're afraid to ask about ourselves. Why do we need to be chosen? Why does affection feel like oxygen? Why does silence hurt more than anger? Plato would whisper that love exposes us because it aims to transform us, not into who we want to be, but into who we already are when the illusions fall away. And maybe that's why love feels violent sometimes, because growth usually begins in discomfort. So tonight, don't hate yourself for wanting connection. Don't punish yourself for longing. There is nothing weak about craving closeness. There is nothing foolish about wanting to be seen. Just remember, love is a skill, not a miracle. A practice, not a fate. A philosophy, not an instinct. Sleep now. Slow down your mind. Let your heart rest. Tomorrow you'll still be learning, but you'll be learning a little wiser than the day before.